Not a good start, is it?
That's a new gavel.
The subcommittee will come to order. The chair recognizes himself for an opening statement. Thanks for all of you for your patience. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first Innovation Data and Commerce Subcommittee markup of the 118th Congress. It is fitting to follow up from last week's subcommittee hearing on competitiveness versus China by bringing real solutions. As I said last week, the American people are the most innovative in the world, but American innovation to build the future of tomorrow's means nothing if our government creates barriers and red tape that stand in the way. The Chinese Communist Party continues to prop up its private sector by throwing money at it. America must not give in to the temptation to follow suit, but instead look at the reasons why our companies leave our shores. Authorizing billions of dollars in government spending is not a silver bullet for the challenges our country faces, especially when we don't even know what the real problems are. So today we will mark up H.R. 813, the Global Investment in American Jobs Act of 2023, a historically bipartisan bill that will help us understand what barriers stand in the way of increasing foreign direct investment from our friendly nations. I say friendly because, importantly, Mr. Pence included language to ensure China cannot meddle with America's innovative private sector. I appreciate that, Mr. Pence. Research has shown there is a close relationship between the higher inbound FDI and fostering more startup companies. Higher inbound FDI to the United States also encourages companies that are feeling the pressure for a return on investment to remain here at home, which is essential to securing America's supply chains. I want to thank Mr. Pence for his continued leadership on this legislation and for being a true ally for American innovation. Thank you, sir. We will also advance legislation to provide greater transparency to the American people about how China may be tracking them. We learned last week that China will stop at nothing to undermine our country, unfortunately, and it begins with collecting information about the American people. So collecting information about the American people and our constituents. We saw live coverage as the CCP deployed a spy balloon that traveled across the country and was not shot down until it had traveled our coasts from Pacific to the Atlantic. What they had collected and transferred back to their country is still a mystery, and our constituents' anxiety is certainly understandable. But let's also remember that the threat we face today the threats we face today are not only at 60,000 feet, but are also in the palms of our hands. While TikTok remains in the app stores for the average American to download, we have been prohibited from downloading it onto our work devices. I want to thank my colleagues from Florida, Representative Kamek and Representative Soto, for introducing the Caution Act, which requires anyone who sells or distributes a mobile application that is banned on federal government devices to notify any individual prior to downloading or uploading the application of such ban. If you come to my home state, the great state of Florida, you may come across signage warning you of alligators in the area. What you do with that knowledge is certainly up to you, but the advisory is warranted given the risk, especially in the swamp, right, Kat? The Caution Act takes a similar approach through an advisory label to users about the risks of downloading a government-banned app. And while TikTok deserves our scrutiny, there are many applications or websites that may have associations with or located in China, which is why the subcommittee will also be moving forward. We're going to move forward HR 784, the Internet Application ID Act, from Representatives Fulcher and Representative Pappas, and HR 742, the TAIL Act, from Representatives Duncan and Representatives Marcy Captor. While many of these apps or websites may not pose any danger, Americans deserve to know if they have connections to the CCP or if they make their information available to the CCP. These are bills which have been championed by lawmakers for several years now. And in the light of our committee's emphasis on the dangers coming from China, I'm glad we will further examine them today. I'm also glad to see these proposals supplement the already strong provisions in our data privacy legislation, which we must pass. The clock continues to tick in the race to win the future against the CCP's oppressive regime. I want to thank the members for their hard work on these bills. So let's work to move these bills forward. They're great proposals, and I'll yield back, and I'll recognize the ranking member, the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky, for 5 minutes for her opening statement.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. You know, this subcommittee has a proud history of working collaboratively and across the aisle. Last Congress, Chairman Bilirakis and I was the chairman at the time, and I'm proud that we are now just switching positions here because I think we can work together. We worked closely to pass more than 10 really significant bills that became law. I sincerely hope that we can continue in this vein. I'm a bit concerned, though, that this hearing is not consistent with our usual procedures. Two of the bills that we are considering today have never been talked about at all, have had a legislative hearing at all, and as a result, stakeholders have not been able to weigh in, and subcommittee members have not been able to ask the questions that need to be asked. That said, the issues that these bills address are very important. It is important that our economic policies support American values and American competition. Congress absolutely has to do more to protect our constituents, their privacy. We have a lot to work to do to protect their privacy and information from China and from the Chinese Communist Party as well, and as well as promoting American businesses and our supply chain. So unfortunately, though, I think the 5 bills that we are discussing today need more proper scrutiny and vetting. We need stakeholders to weigh in to identify unintended consequences and how we can make sure that we address that. For example, one potential consequence is that hotel chains with locations in China may be required to make very confusing disclosures to consumers. We want to make sure that they aren't involved in the requirements of the bill. I will offer an amendment to one of the bills based on on stakeholder feedback that we received last year. But for, I'm going to look at the time, let's see. But for the other 4 bills, I would I would ask for a commitment from you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm hoping that we can do this, to work together to get the stakeholders' feedback and to amend bills as appropriate. So I look forward to working closely with you, Chairman Bilirakis, as we have done so well in the past, and my colleagues across the aisle to address these issues that I absolutely agree are very, very important. But we want to make sure that they really are ready for prime time. And with that, I yield back.
I want to thank the ranking member, and now it's my pleasure to recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mrs. Rodgers, for her 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to everyone to the first Innovation, Data, and Commerce Subcommittee markup of the year. The bills we're considering today encompass this subcommittee's mission, promoting and protecting American leadership and beating China. It's no secret that the Chinese Communist Party wants to replace the U.S. as the global economic and technological power. Their surveillance balloon looming above our heads last week was a clear reminder that the Chinese Communist Party does not seek to build trust with us. This is a regime that suppresses free speech, surveils its own citizens to control them, and commits countless human rights abuses. We must ensure that technologies of tomorrow are developed in an ecosystem that promotes American values and protects American data from the CCP's malicious behaviors. This committee plays a vital role in advancing American competitiveness and global technological leadership. Together, we can lead on this subcommittee to ensure that America, not China, is determining our economic future. I appreciate Mr. Pence for picking up the torch on the foreign direct investment legislation that I had sponsored in the 116th Congress. If this country is going to lead, we need it to be the best place for businesses to set up shop. That means removing obstacles, whether they're regulations, taxes, workforce, or all of the above. FDI is crucial for the United States. It creates more jobs here, strengthens our supply chains, and improves our international stature. There's a reason that companies can't succeed here in America. Throwing money into government programs without identifying the root cause of failure is no path to economic prosperity. I appreciate Mr. Pence has clarified the legislation and ensured that China won't be the source of that FDI. Several of our bills today would strengthen data protections, an issue that united us last year because it is a top priority for the American people. I want to say up front that the bills from Reps. Duncan, Kamek, and Fulcher in no way serve as a substitute for our next steps to enact a comprehensive privacy and data security protections. These bills are complementary to the strong protections against China that were included in ADPPA. Mr. Duncan has rightfully identified that no matter how much we do to secure our networks, our data still travels around the world. The American people deserve to know when that occurs, especially given the control countries like China have over companies in their country and the data that they collect. Legislation from Ms. Kamek with Mr. Soto proposes a straightforward step to address TikTok. Their proposal would require a warning for users before downloading the app, which will make it clear to everyone that the federal government has already deemed it not fit for government mobile devices. Mr. Fulcher and Mr. Pappas have a bill that will shine a light on other apps, aside from TikTok, that originate in China. This is just the start of solutions we consider on this subcommittee in the next 2 years that address both domestic and foreign companies with ties to adversaries like China. Republicans spent considerable time at the beginning of the last Congress to develop legislation that protects and will protect and promote our supply chains. Unfortunately, the former Speaker's office intervened and it devolved into partisan language that didn't survive USICA. In securing American technological and economic leadership is a bipartisan goal. As we move these bills through regular order, I am committed to making sure that these bills are ready for prime time. Definitely want to get the feedback from the members from both sides of the aisle. We are united in our goal and our efforts to protect Americans' data, secure our supply chains, and ensure American innovation and entrepreneurship is leading to anchor the technologies of tomorrow here in the United States. I yield back.
And I'm confident they will get it done under your leadership, Madam Chair. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to chair this subcommittee. Thanks for your confidence in me. Now I'll recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Bilirakis. Today, the subcommittee is holding a markup on 5 bills, 2 of which have never had a legislative hearing. And this is unfortunate because I believe these 5 bills are areas where Democrats and Republicans share similar goals for securing our nation's supply chains and ensuring everyone in the U.S. is informed about who is storing their sensitive data and where it is stored. While this committee has the opportunity to enact real positive change in the lives of everyday Americans, it's unfortunate that the Republican majority is not taking these bills to regular order so that we can hear feedback on the bills from interested stakeholders to ensure there is no unintended consequences. So I hope this is not the way the chairs plan to run this subcommittee and committee over the next 2 years. Now let me get to the legislation before us today. 2 of the bills, H.R. 813, the Global Investment in American Jobs Act, and H.R. 752, the Securing Semiconductor Supply Chain Act, focus on America's supply chain resilience. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed the vulnerabilities in the U.S. supply chain, which had devastating effects for first responders, patients, and everyday Americans. Now, I'm glad to see the Republican majority has made it a priority this Congress to address and strengthen U.S. supply chain. It's critical that we work together to ensure that the disruptions we saw over the past 3 years never happen again. And that's why I am discouraged by the Republicans' refusal to include in this markup the substantive and comprehensive supply chain bills that Representatives Blunt, Rochester, Dingell, Kelly, and Wild worked so hard on in the previous Congress and reintroduced last week. If Republicans are serious about securing our nation's supply chains, I hope they will seriously consider working with Democrats to move these substantive bills, and I look forward to addressing any concerns they may have. Now, 2 of the other bills on today's markup, H.R. 742 and H.R. 784, focus on disclosures to consumers. H.R. 742 requires disclosure of the fact that a mobile application is owned by the Chinese Communist Party or a non-state entity located in the People's Republic of China. H.R. 784 requires disclosure that a mobile application or website maintains and stores information in China. These bills address problems worthy of our attention, but they are way too broad and need more work. Versions of these 2 bills introduced in the last Congress are part of a legislative hearing on December 2021. But there was very little discussion on either of them, and the witnesses did not address how the bills would affect consumers and American businesses. So I support giving consumers access to information about where their data is maintained and who has control over it, but I don't think rushing through 2 pieces of legislation like this without proper feedback is in the best interest of anyone. And I have similar concerns about the last bill on today's markup, H.R. 750. This bill was only introduced a few days ago, and there's not been adequate time to vet this legislation with stakeholders to fully explore its implications. So again, I hope we can work in a bipartisan manner to continue the work Democrats championed in the last Congress to protect consumers and our national security. I also hope my Republican colleagues will commit to working with Democrats between now and any full committee markup so that we can come to a bipartisan agreement on these bills. And with that, Chairman Bilirakis, and I thank you and our ranking member, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, appreciate it. The chair reminds members that pursuant to the committee rules, all members' opening statements will be made part of the record. Now, are there any further opening statements? Okay, we'll go, anyone over here? Okay. Representative Dingell, you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have long fought for policies to support domestic manufacturing capacity, strengthening supply chains, and growing American jobs. I'm grateful that this committee is taking a hard look at these issues and that there is bipartisan interest in taking every effort to strengthen America's competitiveness. Last week, my colleagues, Representatives Blunt, Rochester, Kelly, Wild, and I introduced comprehensive legislation aimed at strengthening our supply chains and preempting future shocks to our domestic capacity like we all experience and continue to experience as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Supply Chains Act has garnered the support of over 100 stakeholder groups, spanning across labor, industry, consumer groups, and others, including the Semiconductor Industry Association, the National Association of Manufacturers, the Motor Equipment Manufacturers Association. This coalition has included the support and input of both Democrats and Republicans, and I look forward to continuing that bipartisan effort in the new Congress. I'm hopeful that our legislation can be considered before the committee, given its relevance to American competitiveness. I'm eager to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to refine and strengthen our bill and move it forward. If we seriously want to consider steps to strengthen our competitiveness with China, we must adopt a comprehensive strategy to shore up our supply chain. These efforts have significant ramifications on our economy and our national security, and many of the members on this committee have underscored these priorities. The legislation under consideration at today's markup, while important in terms of the intent, does not go far enough to address the significant gaps in our supply chain and its resulting impact on American competitiveness. The members of this body know that I am someone who encourages bipartisanship, and I want to work with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to enact strong, substantive legislation that secures our supply chains, strengthens our national security, and supports our manufacturing capacity. I'm looking forward to today's discussion of these bills and to working with the members of this committee to achieve those goals.
The gentlelady yields back? Yes, okay. Anyone on the Republican side? Anyone on the Democrat? Additional? Okay. Ms. Blunt Rochester, please. You're recognized for 5 minutes, and 3 minutes, excuse me, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last week, I called the U.S. economic competition the issue of the moment. And we need to meet this moment head on, and we'll lag behind our allies and our adversaries. Our success depends on strengthening our infrastructure, our workforce, and our supply chains. Last week, we took critical steps, or last Congress, we took critical steps and made the largest investment in infrastructure in our nation's history. We expanded access to broadband and also focused on our roads and our bridges and our water systems. And we also created new workforce programs. But we need to fully address our supply chains. We made gains last Congress with semiconductors, and as the founder of the Bipartisan Future Work Caucus, I was proud to support the CHIPS and Science Act. But the shortages go beyond chips. That's why I introduced the Supply Chains Act with my friends, Representatives Dingell, Kelly, and Wild. We need a comprehensive and resolute strategy to shore up our supply chains, and this bill will do just that. I want to thank Chairman Bilirakis for the focus on these issues. I'm hopeful that this committee will act on the progress that has been made and will also act on my Supply Chains Act bill. And I've also shared with the chairman personally that I am committed to working with my Republican colleagues on energy and commerce to get what we need done together. This isn't a Democratic issue, it's not a Republican issue, it's an American issue. And it is about our wealth, it's about our health, and our national security. My Supply Chains Act is supported by over 150 organizations, from businesses to labor unions to trade associations. And Americans want solutions to the ongoing supply chain issues to help lower cost and shorten time even to receive goods. Ultimately, the reality is that there is more at stake here. The war in Ukraine and the substantial aid that we provided has also exposed the weaknesses in our military supply chains as well. Civilian and military supply chains overlap often, which pits national security interests against civilian consumer interests. Supplies of critical minerals like titanium and products like composites are crucial to the military and to commerce, yet the scarcity of these materials creates several disruptions. The threats from China, Russia, and their allies mean that we must take action now and that the solutions will affect our national security and it will take time to implement. So we've got to act now. We have an opportunity to deliver big for America, and I am hopeful that my colleagues will work in unity on transformational and comprehensive policy to bring jobs back home, to lower costs, and to keep us safe. Let's seize the moment. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady, and I look forward to working with her on these issues. Yeah. Next, I'm going to recognize the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Kat Kamick, for 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all my colleagues for your commentary today. You know, I think, all agree that supply chain mapping and resiliency are important, and I agree that Secretary Raimondo can play a leadership role, certainly. However, just like in broadband, we must map where there is a problem before throwing money at it, and we know that has been a challenge in broadband deployment. The last Congress enacted significant programs at the Department of Commerce that will cost tens of billions of dollars. We owe it to the taxpayers and, quite frankly, our children who will be paying for this to make sure that Commerce gets the CHIPS and broadband programs right before we open up the checkbook for more initiatives there. This is why Mr. Pence's legislation is so important. And I might add has predated the supply chain proposals. We need to review why companies aren't investing here and identify barriers, as money is not the only barrier to entry. For my friends across the aisle, let me remind them about last Congress. Republicans worked on supply chain language in a bipartisan way in this committee for the first half of 2021 at Republicans' request, only to see our work product subverted by the previous Speaker's office, parceled out, and bypass the committee process to become part of the failed USICA experiment. Speaker Pelosi certainly was no friend to this committee last Congress when it came to supporting bipartisan legislation. So if my colleagues are inclined, we can certainly set the clock back to the beginning of the previous session and work on common sense, bipartisan legislation and solutions that have the taxpayers in mind. For today, however, I think we should focus on the good, bipartisan legislation that we are considering and move forward. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Yeah, Representative, thank you for yielding back. Appreciate it. I recognize Ms. Kelly for 3 minutes. Oh, okay. All right. I'm sorry, Cathy. All right, let's recognize Ms. Castor first. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman.
For 3 minutes.
Colleagues, last Wednesday, this subcommittee held its first hearing on America's competitiveness with China, and the witnesses at that hearing told us that the competitiveness issue is critically important, it's complex, and it will take a thoughtful approach by Congress to ensure America outcompetes China and that we adopt effective tools that protect us from surveillance. And House leaders on both sides of the aisle recognize the importance of America maintaining its competitive edge over China, as evidenced by the creation of the Bipartisan Select Committee on the Strategic Competition between the U.S. and the CCP. I was appointed by Leader Jeffries to serve on that committee and look forward to our work and thoughtful bipartisan policies to improve U.S. competitiveness, strengthen our national security, and advance clean energy goals. But this committee and the American public would benefit from a thoughtful approach as well, because the bills before us are flawed and weak, especially the 3 bills focused on disclosure alone that are being rushed. Some of the underlying aims of these bills are good, but if we're truly worried about Chinese apps, just requiring disclosure is woefully inadequate, especially for apps like TikTok that are targeted at our kids. Data access, surveillance, and tracking by domestic interests and foreign adversaries extend beyond TikTok and encompass some of the largest social media platforms, search engines, and others. In fact, just over the past week, documents have come to light in a lawsuit that tens of thousands of software developers in China, Russia, and other high-risk countries may have had access to detailed Facebook user data for years. This is alarming. So we need to act now to protect our privacy online. We need to block our personal data from being transferred to China, Russia, and other actors. We need to end the incessant surveillance, the gathering of data that's used to target Americans, manipulate our kids, and engage in propaganda campaigns. I'm
I'm heartened that I'm hearing from more and more colleagues that we need to protect kids online. I agree. In fact, in early 2019, I was one of the first members of Congress to highlight, raise concerns about ByteDance, the owner of TikTok. But we need to do more than disclosure to protect our kids and empower parents. We need to ban targeted advertisements. We need a prohibition on harmful, manipulative user interface design, restrictions on I'm fired up about this. I'm so concerned. I can't take it. We need restrictions on age. We need an age-appropriate design code. The problem is bigger than just Chinese apps, although the Chinese apps are some of the most harmful. I hear what Chair McMorris Rodgers is saying. I know she is committed to doing this. But these bills are inadequate solutions. We need to do so much more, and we need to act urgently to do it. So I'll look forward to working together on this. I yield back my time.
Thank you. I'll remind the gentlelady, my good friend from Florida, the Tampa Bay area, we just got started. Help is on the way. I promise you that. Good legislation is on the way. Appreciate it very much. Okay, now I don't think we have anybody on the Republican side. Is that correct? All right, I recognize Representative Kelly for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. America cannot continue being prosperous without the capacity to produce. And the recent COVID-19 pandemic taught us all that we cannot have security without supply chain resilience. We cannot have another American century with a manufacturing base in decline. As I mentioned at last week's subcommittee hearing, we need a whole-of-government approach to monitoring and supporting critical manufacturing supply chains instrumental to our economic welfare and national security. And I'm hopeful that we get meaningful supply chain legislation to President Biden's desk. This is why I'm so glad to see my colleagues on the other side of the aisle acknowledge and consider legislation that will begin to address our nation's supply chain problems that have only been exacerbated by the pandemic. Legislation aimed at strengthening our nation's supply chain, resilience continues to be necessary to protect our economy and American manufacturing. That is why I was also so proud to join Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester, Debbie Dingell, and Susan Wild in introducing a comprehensive set of bills to strengthen U.S. supply chains and spur domestic manufacturing of critical goods to grow the U.S. economy and enhance America's national security. My specific bill, the Supply Chain Mapping and Monitoring Act, would create an Office of Supply Chain Resiliency and Crisis Response at the Department of Commerce to help us identify supply chain issues early on and mitigate impacts for manufacturers and consumers. As this committee continues to work on legislation to strengthen America's competitiveness, I ask that we take up such legislation. In closing, the COVID-19 pandemic has made it perfectly clear that disruptions to our supply chain have major detrimental impacts on our economy, on our manufacturers' ability to get their products to market, and on consumers' ability to find the products they want or need to purchase. This requires an immediate solution, so I invite my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to prioritize bolstering our nation's supply chain resilience and consider each approach equally. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, gentlelady yields back. I don't see anyone else. Of course, you can submit your opening statement for the record. We'll get started. The chair calls up H.R. 750 and asks the clerk to report.
H.R. 750, to require any person that sells or distributes a mobile application that the federal government has prohibited for government-owned devices.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point. So ordered. The chair recognizes Representative Kamick for the purpose of offering an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you, Chairman Bilirakis. I have an amendment at the desk.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 750, offered by Ms. Kamick.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. Representative Kamick is recognized for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Chairman Bilirakis, and all of my colleagues here. Today, I am so glad that we are considering the Caution Act, of which I am proud to lead with my friend and colleague from the great Sunshine State of Florida on this subcommittee, Mr. Darren Soto. Every member in Congress understands the national security risks posed by the Chinese Communist Party. The CCP has very publicly stated their goal to undermine U.S. leadership in the world, and part of that mission involves international espionage efforts against the United States government, our citizens, and our allies. A critical part of this operation is a massive data collection on American citizens across the country through a variety of methods, which includes TikTok. What many Americans across the country view as an innocuous social media app filled with fun dances, filters, and trends is in fact a method by which the CCP is collecting information on all users. TikTok, which is owned by ByteDance, a privately held company that is headquartered in Beijing, is actually not a private company. People must be reminded that the so-called private companies in China are actually required by law to turn their user data over to the CCP. In short, the government owns them, and by extension, everything that they collect data on and their users. In December of 2022, FBI Director Chris Wray noted that the Chinese government can control TikTok's recommendation algorithm that allows their government to manipulate content that could be used for influence operations, in addition to the data collection risks for other espionage operations. On December 29th, 2022. Recognizing these security risks of TikTok, the president signed into law No TikTok on Government Devices Act, which prohibits TikTok from being downloaded or used on any device issued by the United States government or government corporation. The Caution Act of 2023, which I introduced with Representative Soto, would build off of the prohibition of TikTok on federal devices to inform consumers of the security risks posed by using the app. Specifically, the bill would require any person selling or distributing a mobile app that is banned on federal government devices to disclose the fact in a clear and conspicuous manner to any individual who downloads, updates, or otherwise uses the application. This required disclosure would be enforced by the Federal Trade Commission. Every person using TikTok in the United States, at minimum, deserves to know that the federal government has banned the use of the app on federal devices due to the severe security risks. This bill would properly inform individuals of the risks prior to downloading or updating the app. Again, I would like to thank Mr. Soto for helping lead this effort with me, and would like to thank Chairman Bilirakis for considering this bill in today's markup. I encourage all members of the subcommittee to support it, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back. Representative Soto, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word, and I thank my colleague from Florida, Rep. Kamick, for this great bipartisan bill. The Caution Act really builds upon bipartisan TikTok ban that was passed in the omnibus for federal devices. It passed in December 2022, was signed into law by President Biden, and expresses concerns, bipartisan mounting concerns of security with TikTok owner ByteDance and their data sharing policies potentially with the Chinese government. And so certainly we want to make sure that the public, including federal employees, get knowledge, receive knowledge and notice that the app was banned from federal devices. I do share the rank member's concern that we want to hear more from the public, and I know that our doors are open to hear folks' suggestions on this bill, and I do want to see, as we go forward, defining sells or distributes a mobile application, and that's something I look forward to working with my colleague on. But overall, great bipartisan bill. On another subject I know we talked about already, this committee is going to have a key role to play as we have the State of the Union tonight, hearing about key laws that were passed last term, like the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan CHIPS Act, 24 House Republicans, 14 senators on the Republican side, the infrastructure law, where we saw 13 Republicans join us in the House and 19 in the Senate. This committee is going to play a key role in implementing these priorities for Florida and the nation to boost jobs, infrastructure, to lower inflation, to help with manufacturing and increase our microchip capacity, rural broadband that my colleagues have talked about, protecting our environment. So I hope in the spirit of bipartisanship, we'll continue to work together because Congress does have an oversight role that's going to be critical to help implement these key pieces of legislation to help all Central Floridians and all Americans. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I'll recognize Representative Lesko for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to strike the last word. As was already stated, TikTok is owned and operated by the Chinese company ByteDance. In June of 2022, FCC Commissioner described ByteDance as beholden to the Chinese government and required by law to comply with Chinese government surveillance demands. In December, as was noted, the Senate passed by unanimous consent the No TikTok on Government Devices Act to prohibit the use of TikTok on government-owned devices. More than half of the states have partially or fully banned TikTok from government devices. This legislation will make it clear to potential TikTok users that the app is banned on certain government devices, giving a stark warning of the dangers of the app to anyone about to download it. I want to thank my colleagues for introducing this bill, and I give it my full support, and I yield back.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Now I'll recognize the ranking member Schakowsky. And for what purpose?
To strike the last word?
You're recognized, ma'am.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that Democrats may want to make some further changes to the legislation before we get it out of the, before we vote it out, but onto the full committee. But I did want to say that last November, Chairman Bilirakis and I wrote to Apple and to Google about the threat of TikTok surveillance of Americans. Google actually answered our letter, but Apple did not, and it is certainly very, very important for us to make sure that we are protecting our constituents and protecting their information from China, as was pointed out before, especially looking at the risk to children. We also, I think you as well as I, Mr. Chairman, actually met with the CEO of, or you're going to, of TikTok, and we're going to have a hearing with the CEO of TikTok in March. So, we are definitely also concerned about the threats that may be posed, and to get all the information that we need in front of this, in front of our subcommittee. And with that, I yield back.
Would the lady yield?
With the general lady.
Would you yield?
Yes, of course.
Yes, appreciate you yielding. I find it noteworthy if you go to the App Store right now, top app right now, and it has been as long as I've been tracking this, is must-have on Apple App Store, TikTok. Yeah, to your point. I yield back.
Do you yield back?
Yes.
Okay, all right, very good. All right, if there's no further discussion, any further discussion? Okay. The vote occurs on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, say no. Okay. The ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of substitute is agreed to. The question now occurs on forwarding H.R. 750 as amended to the full committee. All those in favor, say aye. Those opposed? Okay. The ayes have it, and the bill is agreed to. Very good. Good job. The chair calls up H.R. 784 and asks the clerk to report.
H.R. 784, to require any person that maintains an internet website or that sells or distributes a mobile application that is owned wholly or
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point. So ordered. Are there any bipartisan amendments? Are there any other amendments? It doesn't appear to be. The question now occurs, unless we have somebody that wants to discuss the bill. Anybody here? Yes. Anyone want to discuss on the Republican side? No? Okay. Anyone on the Democrat side?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Oh, okay.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I move to strike the last word.
Okay, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 784 is the Internet Application Integrity and Disclosure Act, and thank you for putting that on today's markup. Special thanks also to my friend Congressman Chris Pappas of New Hampshire for co-leading on this bill. This bill requires that websites, online sellers, distributors of web-based and mobile applications disclose if they are located in China or owned in whole or part by the Chinese Communist Party. It's a warning label to individual users, business users, internet users, and mobile service providers the origin of applications prior to downloading them, particularly if the origin is within China. China has earned our distrust. So the idea here is to protect individuals and businesses who might download such an application, ensuring transparency and disclosure of its origin. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, it's important because the Chinese government, largely through the CCP, has infiltrated the private market, seeking to disseminate misinformation as well as to collect information on user behavior. While some applications may be nominally controlled by private entities, they are often de facto arms of the CCP, aided by a complex web of laws and policies that compel organizations to carry out the wishes of the Chinese Communist Party. Digital products controlled by the party give them access to sensitive information regarding application service providers and end users, including precise geolocation, online user patterns, and the content of private user conversations. Chinese officials have historically used such information for nefarious purposes, including to pursue Chinese Americans and others who protest or legally defy Chinese government policies, or to monitor sensitive business transactions. China is utilizing its 2021 Personal Information Protection and Data Security laws to control how companies operating in China treat user information, both domestically and abroad. In the past few years, Congress and this committee have found bipartisan ways to address similar concerns with bills such as the American Data Privacy and Protection Act, the Secure and Trusted Communications Network Act of 2019, and amendments to the recent National Defense Authorization Act. H.R. 784 adds statutory leverage to guard against concerns addressed by those pieces of legislation by ensuring people know the potential risks to their data and online behavior when tracked by a Chinese entity. Currently, lack of transparency and disclosure is a threat to anyone who downloads an app off the web to their computer or phone, and ultimately it's a threat to the U.S. economy and security. Mr. Chairman, with that, I urge passage of H.R. 784, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady seek recognition?
You speak to me?
Yeah, to you.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, this
You
bill.
move to strike the last word. Okay,
I asked to strike the last word.
very good, thank you.
So this bill is very broad and vague. And I want to say that there was not any testimony about it in any hearing. And Mr. Bilirakis, I would hope that you will commit to work with us to fix the problems before we, before the committee markup.
I work to, I commit to you that we will have a conversation with regard to this particular bill.
Thank you. I yield back.
Anyone else? All right, then let's get on with it. The question now occurs on forwarding H.R. 784 to the full committee. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay, the ayes have it, and the bill is agreed to. The chair calls up H.R. 742 and asks the clerk to report.
H.R. 742, to require that any person that maintains an internet website or that sells or distributes.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point so ordered. Are there any bipartisan amendments to the bill? Are there any other amendments to the bill? Seeing none, we will recognize Mr. Duncan. For what purpose, sir?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
You're recognized, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, for the last week, the nation has been vigilantly watching as a spy balloon from China made its way across the entirety of our country, taking pictures as it went, along with whatever else we find out it was collecting. We may never know the extent of the damage done to our national security by this week-long cross-country escapade. While I'm especially glad that the balloon was popped in South Carolina's airspace, the reality is that the data that the Chinese government got from the balloon is a drop in the bucket compared to what they get from the apps on the average American cell phone. So I rise today to speak on behalf of my bill, H.R. 742, the Telling Everyone the Location of Data Leaving the United States Act, or TEL Act. TEL makes a simple requirement of mobile applications and websites. If you store and maintain data in the People's Republic of China, or if users' data is in any way accessible to the Chinese Communist Party and any other Chinese state-owned entity, you must disclose that to the consumer. Now, I'm asked by apps all the time whether I give them permission to do this, that, and the other. And I agree or I don't agree. That's what we should have apps telling the American people, that your data is going to be stored in the People's Republic of China. Disclose it to the consumer. The American people deserve to know which apps on their phone or programs on their laptop are collecting personal data to give it to the Chinese in quantities far greater than those from the big white balloon and in far greater depth. The bill also provides that failure to disclose is a violation under Unfair or Deceptive Acts clause, and it gives the FTC enforcement authority to fine companies who either fail to disclose or knowingly disclose false information. The big white Chinese spy balloon was a wake-up call to America. This bill should be a wake-up call to big tech. Our constituents are sick and tired of their data being exposed to the CCP. If you don't like the disclosure requirements in this bill, knock off storing data in China or be prepared to tell my constituents that it's stored there. I want to thank my Democrat co-lead on this bill, the gentlelady from Ohio, Marcy Kaptur, especially for her leadership in fighting against Chinese abuses over the entirety of her long and distinguished career. I also want to thank our other original co-sponsors on this important bipartisan legislation, my friend Scott Perry of Pennsylvania, chairman of the House Freedom Caucus. This bill is proof that we can work together across ideological spectrum, across party lines to protect Americans from predators of the Chinese Communist Party. I ask for your support of the legislation, and I yield back the balance.
I thank the gentleman, and for what purpose does the gentlelady seek recognition?
To strike the last word?
That you're recognized.
Yes, I'm not going to disagree that big tech needs to be reined in, but this is a very broad and in many parts vague piece of legislation. And once again, this is the second of the bills I wanted to mention where there has been no testimony about or any hearing. And I, again, would like to ask you, Mr. Bilirakis, that you work with us, that before we move this bill along, that we have a commitment from you that we can discuss its content.
I will
Will the
commit.
gentlelady yield?
Yes, please. Well,
Will the
the
gentlelady-
gentlelady has the time.
Yes. Will she yield to me?
I'll yield to you,
Okay.
sure.
Thank you. This is the second Congress I filed this piece of legislation in, so it's been out there. And Congress put a lot of pressure on big tech to make sure that apps informs you that tracking data was on or give you the permission to opt out. So this is just a continuation of informing our constituents that that's out there. It actually has been talked about for a long time. So this isn't a new issue. Another legislative hearing talking about this specific issue, in my opinion, isn't necessary. We all know the issue. Our constituents talk to us about the issue, and that's why I think it's so important. I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I yield back.
Okay. Yeah, if the gentlelady would yield to me briefly? Yeah. Yes.
Okay, I yield back at
Yeah,
this
we
time.
did
Thank
have a
you.
legislative hearing on this in the previous Congress. Just wanted to point that out, but I commit to having a conversation with you, obviously. We can have a discussion.
Thank you. We have new members, too, so I would like to, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion on this particular bill? Yes, we do. Okay. Representative Lesko, and then we have Mr. Dunn as well after that. But
Thank you, Mr.
for what
Chair.
purpose, ma'am?
I move to strike the last word.
Thank you. You're recognized.
As a co-sponsor of this legislation, I'm hopeful that this bill will advance out of the subcommittee today and head to the full committee and then the floor. This bipartisan legislation is critical to protecting Americans' data from the Chinese Communist Party. Americans deserve to know if their data is being stored, transferred, or exposed to China by companies that are owned by the Chinese Communist Party. China is a threat to our nation, and their efforts to exploit Americans and their data cannot be ignored. I support this legislation, and I yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady yields back. Anyone on the Democrat side wish to speak? All right. I'll recognize Representative Dunn for 5 minutes. For what purpose, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to strike the last one.
Thank you. Thank you. You're recognized.
Thank you. So data privacy and security is vital to consumers and to industry. It's no secret that the CCP has repeatedly compromised the private data of millions of Americans. Banning TikTok on government devices was an important first step in protecting Americans' data, but taking additional steps to safeguard data is absolutely necessary. This legislation would allow the FTC to endorse rules that empowers Americans to know when their data is being compromised by China and if it's being stored, transferred, or exposed to China or to any companies owned by the CCP. I'm thankful that this committee and the China Select Committee are taking steps to protect Americans, in addition to taking the threat from China seriously. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Any further discussion? Okay. The question now occurs on forwarding H.R. 742 to the full committee. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The ayes have it, and the bill is agreed to. The chair calls up H.R. 813 and asks the clerk to report.
H.R. 813, to direct the Secretary of Commerce in coordination with the heads.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point so ordered. Are there any bipartisan amendments? Are there any other amendments? Yes. The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Foreign direct investment risk includes offshoring and theft, and theft of intellectual property, or, let me offer, okay. I have an amendment at the desk.
Amendment to H.R. 813, offered by Ms. Schakowsky.
Yeah, you're recognized.
Okay, so let me start over. Foreign direct investment risks include offshoring and the intellectual property or trade security. Excuse me. Offshoring has serious consequences and impact on workers. 1/3 of job loss in the manufacturing sector can be attributed to offshoring. Offshoring has contributed to the decline of our industrial base and weakened our supply chain. The United States relies on countries from around the world on things like consumer electronics, household goods, food, pharmaceuticals, etc. The Department of Defense warns that this is a national security risk. My amendment strengthens the underlying bill. What's missing from this bill is clear in, I'm sorry, what does that say?
Labor.
I'm sorry. I think most of the people on this committee know I have a disability when it comes to reading. I'm doing my best. So what my amendment, I believe, would strengthen this bill, what's missing from the bill is clear instructions for the Department of Commerce to study the impact of foreign direct investment on workers, including the impact of offshoring and outsourcing on worker wages, employment, and well-being. Foreign direct investment should not weaken the economy and should strengthen our national security. And we should make the United States the most attractive and is that right? Okay, attractive country in the world to investment, but workers and our national security cannot be on the line here. And so I think this amendment would be helpful to the legislation that is before us today. And I yield back.
Go, you're recognized, you're recognized. Oh, I thought you were gonna, well, will the lady agree to withdraw the amendment if I commit to you that we will discuss this particular issue before we go to markup?
Yes, I appreciate your saying that, and the answer is yes, I will withdraw at
Okay.
this time.
The amendment is withdrawn. Next, we have, is there further discussion on the particular bill? Representative Pence, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
You are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting my legislation, H.R. 813, the Global Investment in American Jobs Act. This bill seeks to improve the attractiveness of foreign investment from allied nations and identify barriers that are holding back American competitiveness. Over 200,000 Hoosiers are directly employed by international companies, 56% of which are in the manufacturing sector, many in my own hometown. Because of our long storied history as a leader in the manufacturing industry, companies across the world have keyed into and on Indiana. Before companies started outsourcing operations from my district to China and other countries, company talents had lifted small and rural communities across the Hoosier state. Take Cummins Engine Company, for example. I have lived in Columbus my entire life, and nearly every family, my own included, has some connection to the company that has helped build and grow Columbus, Indiana. And now, as companies across the world rethink their partnership with the Chinese Communist Party, we have an opportunity to bring back stable, good-paying jobs through investments from allied nations. Importantly, this legislation would also seek to uncover actions from the Communist Chinese Party to gain access to U.S. markets and circumvent national security laws. For decades, China has built a calculated strategy to corner global supply chains through IP theft and free market manipulation. H.R. 813 addresses anti-competitive practices of the CCP to undermine innovation and gain footholds in next-generation technologies. I'm encouraged that the Global Investment in American Jobs Act has long had broad bipartisan support, and I look forward to working across the aisle to pass this legislation. During our subcommittee's hearings last Congress on this bill, we heard directly from stakeholders regarding the importance of foreign investment and the impact this legislation had on expanding opportunities for communities across the country. I urge support for this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. Is there any further discussion on the Democrat side? Yeah, we'll recognize Ms. Blunt-Rochester for 5 minutes, please, on this particular bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I applaud Mr. Pence's efforts to bring American jobs back to the United States, and I believe we can go further. This can and should be part of a larger comprehensive strategy to reshore jobs to the United States. According to the International Monetary Fund, the United States is currently the world leader in attracting foreign direct investment to its shores. In 2022, the IMF reported that we attracted nearly $5 trillion in investment. While it is true that China has been attracting FDI at alarming rates, the good news is that America is still ahead, and America attracted more investment at a greater rate. We need a periodic and comprehensive strategy akin to the National Defense Strategy that determines the strength and weaknesses of manufacturing and supply chains in America. My bill, the Supply Chains Act, would do exactly that. It would create a comprehensive strategy that is developed every 4 years and would identify investments like FDI that can help spur manufacturing growth in the United States. Mr. Pence, I would love to work with you. Perhaps together we can ensure America remains a manufacturing and economic leader permanently. I will support Mr. Pence's bill, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Anything further? The question now occurs on forwarding H.R. 8. Oh, there is one. Okay. Mr. Soto from the great state of Florida, you're recognized.
Thank you, my dear friend and chairman from the great state of Florida. You know, with the State of the Union tonight, we know there's been a real manufacturing boom over the last year in the United States. 500,000 new manufacturing jobs created last year based upon the great American worker and American ingenuity, and driven by key landmark laws like the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and even the infrastructure laws improving supply chains. 13 million workers in America are now working in manufacturing. In Central Florida, we're helping manufacture in aerospace and space, microchips, simulation and training. We saw a 4% increase last year, but there are over 800,000 jobs still not filled. So we know we have work to do both in this bill with improving investment, foreign investment, as well as workforce training to make sure that Americans who want to work have the job training skills to get there. So I look forward to working with Mr. Pence and others on this bill.
I thank my friend. Anyone else? Anything further? All right. Well, the question now occurs on forwarding H.R. 813 to the full committee. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The ayes have it, and the bill is agreed to. Congratulations, Mr. Pence. All right, the chair calls up H.R. 752 and asks the clerk to report.
H.R. 752, to require Select USA to coordinate with...
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point. So ordered. All right, if that's what you want, that's what you get. You're recognized. That's even better.
I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting H.R. 752, the Securing Semiconductor Supply Chains Act, which I co-led with Congressman Eshoo. This bipartisan bill seeks to uncover barriers to expanded foreign direct investment into domestic manufacturing for semiconductor chips. Over the past few years, Hoosiers in southern Indiana felt the ripples in our economy caused by shortages of semiconductor chips. Auto manufacturers like Honda and Greensburg and engine developers like Cummins told me firsthand the potential impacts on day-to-day operations because of the chip shortage. We learned the hard way that our economy cannot rely solely on adversarial nations to secure semiconductor chips. My greatest priority in Congress has been fighting for policies that have the opportunity to create good-paying jobs for Hoosiers and all Americans. I urge support for this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. Are there any bipartisan amendments, just to be safe? Any bipartisan amendments? Any other amendments?
I mean, I already spoke to
Okay, very good. If there aren't any, then we will, the question now occurs on forwarding H.R. 752 to the full committee. All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed? The ayes have it, and the bill is agreed to. The clerk will call the roll on this particular bill.
Ms. Rodgers. Ms. Rodgers votes aye. Mr. Bouchon. Mr. Bouchon votes aye. Mr. Wahlberg. Mr. Wahlberg votes aye. Mr. Duncan. Mr. Duncan votes aye. Mr. Dunn. Mr. Dunn votes aye. Ms. Lesko. Ms. Lesko votes aye. Mr. Pence. Mr. Pence votes aye. Mr. Armstrong. Mr. Armstrong votes aye. Mr. Allen. Mr. Allen votes aye. Mr. Fulcher. Mr. Fulcher votes aye. Ms. Harshbarger. Ms. Harshbarger votes aye. Ms. Kamick. Ms. Kamick votes aye. Ms. Schakowsky.
Aye.
Ms. Schakowsky votes aye. Ms. Castor. Ms. Dingle. Ms. Kelly.
Kelly votes aye.
Ms. Kelly votes aye. Ms. Blunt Rochester.
Blunt Rochester votes aye.
Ms. Blunt Rochester votes aye. Mr. Soto.
Soto votes aye.
Mr. Soto votes aye. Ms. Clark.
Ms. Clark votes aye.
Ms. Clark votes aye. Mr. Pallone.
Votes aye.
Mr. Pallone votes aye. Mr. Bilirakis.
Votes aye.
Mr. Bilirakis votes aye.
All right, it's unanimous, correct? Well, you can, yeah, will the clerk tell us?
Let her report.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, there were 19 ayes and 0 noes.
Very good, excellent. All right, without objection, staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the legislation approved by the subcommittee today. So ordered. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. I thank everyone.